Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. I'm Mary Tarville, today's worship associate. Our mission here at First Church is to welcome with love, to support learning and spiritual growth, to serve our wider community, and to work for justice, equity, and inclusion. First Church is a place where you're free to be you, no matter the color of your skin, no matter whom you love, no matter your gender, no matter your age, no matter your socioeconomic status, no matter where your spiritual journey is taking you. So, bring your questioning mind, bring your expansive heart, bring your entire self to this beloved community. Please make sure to read the announcements and inserts in today's order of service, where you can find important information regarding accommodations and upcoming events. If you're visiting us today, we especially welcome you. Please feel free to take our monthly potluck service into your tummy and home with you, which takes place after today's fellowship. The ushers are here, or any other people can direct us that way, or you can just smell where your nose leads you. Don't worry if you haven't brought a dish to share, there's going to be plenty. Flowers. Well, let's go to the offering plate. First of all, we don't have an offering plate per se. There are two boxes in the back you'll see. We believe it's the responsibility of our members and contributing friends to fund our ministry, not our guests, so please feel free to be a guest. As a guest, we would rather that you simply relax and enjoy your experience today here at First Church. That said, if you do feel moved to make a contribution this morning, you'll find the collection box in the back of the sanctuary. The flowers today. Can we welcome our Reverend Dr. Alex Riegel for his first year? Before we begin our service, please take a moment to wave to the people online, rise and greet your neighbors, say hello in the chat, and when you hear the singing bowl, with this, you'll return. I would like to invite Clancy to light the chalice. And as the kids are kibitzing over there, and as she's lighting the chalice, I'd like to read the Golden Rule. A mosaic located at the entrance of the United Nations Secretariat building in New York depicts people of different nationalities, religions, and cultures from all over the world. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The so-called Golden Rule is inscribed on its surface. What exactly is the Golden Rule? It's a unique law because it expresses an intuition which is accessible to human knowledge and conscience. In that, it's part of the main religious schools of thought all around the world. As a consequence, it can also be described as universal ethical code. According to recent studies, it was mentioned as early as 3000 BC in the Vedic tradition, don't do unto others what you don't want done unto you. Among the oldest Golden Rule quotes we can find from the philosopher Confucius, who lived in China between the 6th and 5th century BC. And I quote, "Do not do unto others what you do not want them to do to you." Here are a few more versions of this. In the Baha'i tradition, blessed is he who prefers his brother to himself. Buddhism, whatever is disagreeable to yourself, do not do unto others. Jainism, in happiness and sorrow, in joy and pain, we should consider every creature as we consider ourselves. Islam, none of you will believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Shintoism, be charitable to all beings, for love is a representation of God. Zoroastrianism, do not do to others what is harmful to yourself. So as we take one of those into our heart, we're going to stand if you can. And our first hymn this morning is number 209, O Come, You Longing, Thirsty Souls, found in the gray hymnal. Message for all ages.
So yesterday, Lily, my mom, and I all went back to school shopping for clothes. You really liked the clothes you got, didn't you? Yeah, and then you're going to see your friends again. You're very excited about that. So here's the deal, though. Whenever we get new clothes, we have to clean out the closet of old clothes. Have you ever done this? I see some nods and some head shakes. Yeah, and I have to get rid of some of your clothes. I know the adults in our congregation have done this. Here's the thing about getting rid of clothes. Sometimes you get rid of clothes because, well, they just don't seem to be you anymore. What do you think about that shirt, Lily? You don't know if it's yours or Sierra's? It's because you never wear it. Or maybe you get rid of clothes because you've just grown so much and you've outgrown them. That's definitely yours, but it doesn't fit you anymore, does it? Yep. Or maybe you get rid of clothes because you've worn them so much that they've just become worn. Dinosaur, you like that one, I know. Yeah. Here's the thing, though. People, we don't just clean out our closets. Sometimes we have to take a look at our beliefs, too. We have to pull out our beliefs and think about them and wonder, I wonder if this belief is worn out. I wonder if this belief just doesn't fit me anymore. I wonder if this belief is just not me anymore. And here's the thing, not just people do this, but big organizations too. Back in June, the Unitarian Universalist Association took out all our beliefs, our 7 principles, and looked at them and thought, those need updating. And so they came up with a new set of values, which we'll talk more about next week. But until then, I just wonder, what is a belief that you have that just doesn't work for you anymore? All right, let's head to our class.
We're going to take a deep breath and a deep pause as we do some centering silence. Share the Plate. In July, your Share the Plate donations helped purchase supplies for First Church, First UU, Vote Postcard Writing Campaign. By the way, last year, Vivian Klein, who's coming up on 100, she wrote 200 postcards, just saying. So if you think your fingers are getting tired, think of Vivian Klein. We're launching the campaign today, so after the service, you'll find volunteers outside the sanctuary before and during and after the potluck, handing out postcard packets. If 50 people in this congregation today each just took one packet of 20 postcards, we'll soon be sending out 1,000 postcards to 1,000 underrepresented voters to help them find a way to vote. Of course, you can take more than one packet, like Vivian Klein, and keep coming back for more. We'll be doing this as long as the funds hold out, so please join our effort. For the month of August, the Share the Plate is Shoes for the Homeless Incorporated. Shoes for the Homeless Incorporated, a nonprofit that provides new, correctly fitting gym shoes and socks to Cincinnati public school children in desperate need. Wearing ill-fitted or worn shoes often condemns children to physical, social, and emotional problems that last for a lifetime. Through a uniquely efficient and effective program, Shoes for the Shoeless help children eliminate one of poverty's most visible stigmas. You can give children improved confidence in the classroom, no more pain due to curling toes to fit into a pair of hand-me-downs 3 sizes too small, and the ability to participate in all of school's activities in and out of the classroom. This year, First UU Church wants to provide Avondale Elementary children with this opportunity. The cost to give one child a pair of new shoes, 3 pairs of socks, is just $31. If you would like to donate but are not able to when the ushers come around, please, with their collection plates, you may write a check at any time this month. You can put it in the box in the back that is marked. Please make the checks payable to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati with Shoes for, the number 4, the shoeless in that memo line. You may also bring your donation online in the Breeze system at any time. So for a minute, if you look behind me, you'll see a video introducing Shoes for the Homeless, the shoeless.
Shoes for the Shoeless was born in my heart when I heard a story from a friend who was running a social service agency in West Dayton. She told me that the day prior, a boy, his mom, and 3 sisters had walked into her office looking for food and looking for shelter. They'd been evicted and were homeless. And he took his shoes off and his socks were full of blood. His toes had grown on top of each other. He was wearing a size 12 gym shoe. He needed a 15. He was also trying out for the freshman basketball team at his high school. He was running constantly on badly damaged feet. And it broke my heart. And I became the person who was going to help. Shoes for the Shoeless is a nonprofit. Our mission is very simple. We provide brand new gym shoes and socks that fit to local children in need. We're a local-based mission. Local money, local kids. We meet our local needs first. I'm very passionate about this mission. Not only do we provide brand new gym shoes and socks for children, we take teams of community volunteers into schools, into agencies where children have been referred, and we measure your feet. We set up our version of a shoe store. Wherever we go, volunteers work one-on-one with students. You measure their feet, and you try shoes on them until you find something that fits them perfectly. No one in the country does this but us.
All right, stand up. Let's see how they feel. Comfortable?
We help over 1,000 local children a month. It takes 300 to 500 volunteers to make that happen. There's nothing better than putting a pair of shoes on a child that's 3, 4, 5 sizes bigger than what they...
Number 60.
We didn't do a sound check ahead of time, but we're good. A hand for our AV support this morning. Great job, thank you. And thank you for the flowers, recognizing, my first complete year of ministry with you all. Very much appreciated. I think we had a really good first year, and I think we're going to have a really good second year. But as I look around you, I'm beginning to wonder about the effectiveness of my ministry, because look out, all I see are scoundrels. You're all still scoundrels. Not a saint among you. I mean, let's get with the program here. No, we're all still scoundrels, which basically means, you're not to blame for who you are. Go gentle on yourselves and go gentle on everyone else. And we're all doing the best we can. And as Sister Beck points out, the goal is not to become a saint, really. It's just to become a sensational scoundrel. That's what we're aiming for. Today, I'm actually going to talk about a topic that it's kind of idiosyncratic, because it's about a very small religious sect in India that a lot of people don't know much about. But I actually studied this group in divinity school for an entire year, and I find this to be an incredibly fascinating religious tradition, and they hold to certain principles and certain practices that I think are incredibly valuable. And so I'm offering this week, next week, and the week after that some insights from the religious sect, with the hopes that you'll have some grist for your mill about how to become a more sensational scoundrel than the scoundrel you already are. How many people here have heard of Jainism? Raise your hand if you've heard of Jainism. Oh, most of you have heard of it. All right. So maybe it's not as idiosyncratic as I thought. Who knows what the Jains are most famous for? Do you know what they're most famous for? Just not stepping on bugs. That's basically it. But why don't they step on bugs? All life is important. And because all life is important, we're not to harm other beings. In other words, their primary principle is nonviolence, otherwise known as Ahimsa. Jainism is the oldest known religion in India. It actually even predates Hinduism. They're very similar. Jainism, in a way, is a forerunner of Hinduism, but they actually are distinct religions. And so nonviolence, the principle of nonviolence, or Ahimsa, actually, as far as we know, comes from that Jain tradition, which we can trace back 3,500 years, believe it or not. It goes back a long, long way. So it's a principle that comes from the Jain, somebody who practices Jainism, and it goes back 3,500 years. And I actually love this tradition because I think the principle of nonviolence, or the principle of Ahimsa, remains as informative and important today as it did back when the Jains started proffering it. So Ahimsa, the root of that word is a Sanskrit root, hims. And hims means to strike, right? So himsa means to strike someone, to do harm or violence to someone. Ahimsa is to negate himsa. It's to not do harm or violence. So the A in front of himsa is the negation of himsa. So ahimsa means non-violence or non-harm. Now, with the Jains, this is a very steep religious belief and path, because the Jains tell us when we are given instructions not to harm other beings, we're not simply saying, don't go to somebody and push them over. We're also saying, don't harm anybody with your words either, which I'll talk about next week. And even more steeply, don't have harmful thoughts. And I'll talk about that in 2 weeks. So the Jains tell us, do no harm, which is what we'll talk about today, in word or in thought. So my mic, right? Am I standing in a bad spot? Is that why the mic is dropping? Do you all hear the mic dropping? All right. So do you? There. Or back to where do I need to stand? Not a mic. I really want to drop a mic. Sermon and drop a mic. Let's pack. I'll be right back. Don't have any evil thoughts while I'm gone. All right, so there's maybe a 50-50 chance we solved it with a different pack. All right, sounds like we might have. Y'all caught basically what I was saying though, right? All right. So, Ahimsa is a Jain principle. It's their primary Jain principle. And there's a phrase that appears in Jain literature and also in the Mahabharata, which is a grand epic within the Hindu tradition. And the phrase is Ahimsa Paramo Dharma. And it appears many times actually in the Mahabharata. So it made it from Jainism into Hinduism. And you'll also recognize probably that Buddhism subscribes to the same principle. And Ahimsa Paramo Dharma means that Ahimsa is the supreme religion. And not only is it a spiritual concept, it is also what drives primary Jain spiritual practice. So basically, the Jains believe that every living being has a right to exist. Every living being has a right to exist, whether it's another person, whether it's an animal, whether it's a tiny insect, and even a plant. These are all forms of consciousness, and they have as much right to live in the world according to their nature and their path through life as any one of us. And so it's a very extensive principle, and they apply it across the board to all living beings. So, because every living being has a right to live and to follow its own path through life, if you do anything to interfere with that being's path through life, if you harm it or you even upset its path through life as it's working out its own path, you're doing harm to that being. And somebody said, the Jains are the ones who don't like to harm bugs. That's what's behind that. Like an insect is working out its own path through life. It's taking its consciousness, which it shares, just like you have a consciousness, and living its life path as an insect. And so what the Jains are famous for, you'll see Jain monks and nuns, they were wearing masks long before COVID. So have you ever seen a picture of a Jain monk or nun and you'll see them, they'll wear their robes and they'll have a mask draped over their nose and mouth. And the reason they do this is because they have known for 3,500 years that there are beings so small that the eye can't see them, and they waft through the air. And so what's behind all this? Well, karma is a Jain idea. It predates Hinduism, even in the Jain tradition. And so karma accrues to you when you do harm to another being. Does everybody pretty much know what karma is? I mean, if you understand the bumper sticker, my karma ran over my dogma, right? You've heard this before. You have a good sense of what karma is. Karma is this spiritual mechanism that determines your birth into life and your path through life, right? And so we're all here working out our karma based on previous births. And you can either accrue karma or you can eliminate karma by the way you live this incarnation. And if you do harm to any other being, even the smallest microscopic insect or plant, you're accruing more bad karma. And it will attach to your soul, and it will affect your next incarnation. And so those accrual of karma keep you bound to the mechanism of reincarnation. And you get born over and over and over again as an opportunity to work off your karma, Does that sound pretty familiar? Hinduism has this belief and Buddhism has this belief, but it goes back all the way to the time of the Jains. And so it's very important for Jains who want to work off their karma, who want to become liberated from the mechanism of reincarnation or rebirth, to not accrue any more karma and to work off the karma they have. And so part of my spiritual journey through life, part of my path of becoming liberated from the cycle of rebirth, is to not harm other beings so I don't accrue any more karma. That's what's behind the Jain belief in Ahimsa. There's a simple story to relate this point. It's about Gandhi and his mother, and when Gandhi was a child, he was sitting in the front of his hut with his mother, talking to his mother, and he noticed that there was an insect crawling on his mother's foot, and it was a stinging insect. And so he shouted at her, "Watch out, you're going to get bit." And his mother calmly just flicked her foot, knocked the insect off, and let it scurry away. And Gandhi said, "How come you didn't kill that bug? It's going to bite somebody else." And his mother said, "Mohandas, that bug has as much of a right to live as you and I do." And so that's a simple story that tells you what Ahimsa is all about and how serious they take it. You know, Gandhi is actually somebody who is very much affected by Jainism. He wasn't born into a Jain household, but he was born in Gujarat. And Gujarat, India, had a strong influence of Jainism when Gandhi was born. And his mother, who was a very devout Hindu, had close relationships with a lot of Jain monks and nuns in Gujarat. And so she actually spent a lot of time in the presence of Jain people. And because of this, she taught Gandhi the Jain principles of life. And a number of those Jain principles, Ahimsa being one of them, became very important to Gandhi's own life philosophy. So Gandhi actually, as you know, helped free India from British rule. And he did it using Jain principles, which many people don't know. And his primary political strategy was called Satyagraha. So Satyagraha is the combination of two Sanskrit terms, Satya, which means truth, and Agraha, which means to hold tightly or to hold firmly. So Satyagraha means to hold firmly to the truth. And the truth as Gandhi understood it was, principle to the truth as Gandhi understood it was Ahimsa, or nonviolence. The universe is so designed that it is paramount that we not commit violence. And so Gandhi's entire political strategy was a political strategy of adhering firmly to the truth of nonviolence. And you wouldn't think that would be a very successful political strategy for kicking another country out of your country, would you? You normally think that you'd have to muster up some courage and go to battle and get rid of the scoundrels, right? But Gandhi insisted that India adopt nonviolence as its political strategy for getting rid of the British. And he held on to that through Satyagraha, a firm, tenacious holding on to the truth of Ahimsa. And so if you go back and you look at the movie Gandhi with this in mind, you'll suddenly be able to see that everything he did abided by this political philosophy of Satyagraha. It was very important to him. Here are a couple quotes from Gandhi to explain this. This is from his autobiography. Satyagraha is essentially a weapon of the truthful. And a Satyagrahi is a person who has pledged themselves to nonviolence. He also says, the exercise of writing this autobiography has given me ineffable mental peace because it has been my fond hope that it might bring faith in truth and Ahimsa. So Gandhi was very much wedded to this Jain principle of Ahimsa, and it drove his actions in the world. And he was a profound political and spiritual figure because of it. And I actually believe that if we were truly to adopt Ahimsa, we actually would find our spiritual convictions in the way we are present in the world to be much more powerful than we currently experience them to be, or than we currently experience ourselves to be. So the simple interpretation of ahimsa is do not cause harm to another being. And I've talked about the ways that can happen. And you especially don't impinge on another being's path through life. But this kind of, to me, poses an interesting question. And the question is this. Does ahimsa's requirement not to interfere with another being's life path require us to allow suffering that could be avoided? Like if we encounter another being that's suffering, the Jains will tell you, well, it's suffering because of its karma. And that suffering is how it works off the karma with which it was born. And if you interfere with that being's suffering, you're going to interfere with its life path and remove the possibility of it working off that karma through its suffering. You see the logic of that? And so the Jains very, very rarely interfered with another being, no matter the degree of suffering. Now, how does that strike you? Does that strike you as intuitively problematic? It struck Gandhi as intuitively problematic. One of the things that the Jains do is they run animal shelters. And the animal shelter, if it's run by a Jain, is a shelter for animals where any animal can be brought under any conditions, whether it has a cancerous leg or whether it's been hit by a car, whatever the case may be. You can bring an animal to a Jain animal shelter and it will feed and house the animal. But it will take no action to alleviate the animal's suffering, because that would actually be doing harm to the animal. It would be interfering with its life path and the karma it's trying to work off, right? Well, Gandhi actually found this intuitively problematic as well. And there's a story about Gandhi and an ailing goat that he encountered at a Jain animal shelter. So there was this goat that was suffering greatly at a Jain animal shelter. And Gandhi said to the Jains, you need to put that goat to death. Its suffering is too much, you need to put it to death. And he ended up running afoul of the Jains over this. And it actually did a lot of damage to his reputation in the Jain community. He also advocated, like if you Google Gandhi stray dogs in India, you'll find out that he actually advocated putting down stray dogs, because he felt that stray dogs actually increased the suffering in India as a general phenomenon. So Gandhi would make these utilitarian calculations about when to help and when not to help. And the utilitarian calculation was, when is suffering too much, even given the principle of ahimsa? And so there was a critical point at which Gandhi would say, this suffering is too much, and that would justify taking extreme action of maybe putting an animal down. Okay, so this chagrined the Jains, but Gandhi actually held to this. And I actually agree with that. So when I think of ahimsa, I think that it's a very deeply spiritual, very profound commitment to live life in a nonviolent way. And I think that's really, 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 really important for all of us. Think about everything you do in the course of your day that creates violence. If you're a meat eater, think about this the next time you grab that slab of steak out of that cellophane wrapper when you go to the grocery store. If you're a vegetarian, think about this when you boil water. You're killing microscopic organisms. When you drive down the road in your car, the clothes you wear, what kind of harm had to happen for the clothes that you're now wearing to get to you? You think of things like carbon footprints. You know, what kind of damage is Amazon Prime doing to the beings on the planet who are trying to live their lives? We are doing an awful lot of damage to the other beings in the world, and we rarely actually tend to think about it because we have a different set point than the Jains. So I think it would be really helpful to all of us to think about where we do violence and where we can curb the amount of violence that we do, even if it's incidental and unintentional. But I think there needs to be a little bit more than just that version of ahimsa. And kind of like Gandhi, I kind of think that when we think about actions we shouldn't be taking in the world in order to enact ahimsa or not harm other beings, I think that what's lacking in the Jain teaching of ahimsa is what action should we take that's positive in the world? Like, rather than restraining action to not harm other beings, what proactive action should we be taking to help other beings? Are we not to help other beings? Like, where does love and compassion and charity fit into ahimsa? It's not really clear. So there might be a limitation to ahimsa there, and Gandhi ran into it, and I run into it when I think about ahimsa, because I do think that any meaningful spiritual principle ought also to include not just prohibitions, but prescriptions for positive behavior toward other beings. Ought to include prescriptions for love and compassion and charity. So when you run across somebody, you not only need to ask, or some being, how do I not harm this being? I think it's also important to ask, how do I help this being? Because I think we're also called to help other beings in the world. Are we not? This is so obvious, I almost don't really need to state it, right? We all intuitively feel we need to also be helping, right? So you could say that if there's a critique of ahimsa, if there's a critique of nonviolence, which is a prohibition against harm, you could say that critique is it allows far too many opportunities for what the Christian world would call sins of omission. You know what a sin of omission is? A sin of omission is when you had the opportunity to do good and you chose not to. So the Christian world tells you you are to enact love and compassion and charity whenever possible. And when that opportunity arises for you and you don't do it, you're omitting that. That's actually a sin. And I think that that's a really important counterbalance to the principle of ahimsa. You could even argue that, enacting love and compassion and charity could be part of somebody's karmic path, right? Why does it have to be the case that somebody's karmic path is always about their suffering in the world and that's why they suffer? Why can't somebody's karmic path be somebody who came into the world to do good for other beings? So I think that's something that ahimsa is a bit shy on, but nevertheless I think ahimsa is an incredibly important principle. So I know that in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, not everybody has a spiritual side. As I shared with you when I came a year ago, I'm a theist. I believe in God, and I have a deep spiritual interest, and I have a long-standing spiritual practice. But I know my audience. There are some people who kind of get on the nods when I talk too much about God or spirituality or spiritual practice, because we don't all go there. Some of us are more scientifically minded, and from time to time, we need a little grist for our scientific mill. So I'm going to end this sermon by reading you a scientific prescription for ahimsa, so that we can also ground this in the practical reality of our innate humanness. Because I think our innate humanness actually lends itself to love and compassion and charity. And in fact, Charles Darwin wrote an awful lot about compassion and cooperation. So I thought to myself, can I find a reading to share of a scientific bent along the lines of, like, what would Darwin have said about ahimsa? And lo and behold, the first Google hit was an article entitled "Modern Science Teaches Ahimsa" by Kenneth Leong. And this is like 5 minutes long, so it's a bit of a read, but I think that this will really, for those of you who have more of a rational, scientific, empirical bent to your life philosophy, I think this will help ground ahimsa in your thinking as well. Kenneth Leong writes, "Yesterday I gave a presentation to my Buddhist group on ahimsa. I said that kindness to other humans and other life forms is not a luxury but a necessity. This is particularly true at this time in history as our society is haunted by climate change, pandemics, and racial strife. In my presentation, I quoted both Charles Darwin and Albert Einstein. Some Buddhist friends were surprised about that quote from Darwin. Their understanding is that Darwin promoted the idea of the survival of the fittest. We've all heard of the survival of the fittest as a summary of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, right? With the survival of the fittest, life is portrayed as a ruthless battle for existence. Clearly, the criticism of Darwinism is not limited to Christians. Many non-Christians are critical of Darwin on both religious and moral grounds. So here we should note that the phrase survival of the fittest was coined by Herbert Spencer, not Charles Darwin. Spencer was a British philosopher, although Darwin later adopted the phrase to talk about his evolutionary theory. In addition, how we understand the term fittest here is critical. A management professor, Leon Megginson, had this interpretation. According to Darwin's origin of the species, it is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not necessarily the strongest of the species that survives. The species that survives is actually the one best suited to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. So that's what survival of the fittest means. It means that that species that is best suited to adapt to the changing environment in which it finds itself is the species that will flourish. That's a piece of Darwinian evolution that a lot of people don't understand, and it actually says that evolution isn't necessarily a process of progress or betterment. It's a process by which the species best suited to whatever changes are going on in the environment will thrive and survive. And it's very possible that a species that is less intelligent or less powerful might actually be better suited in certain situations to survive. That's what evolutionary theory is all about. In other words, this is my word, Darwin saw value not just in competition, but also in kindness and benevolence. And he wrote a lot about kindness and benevolence in The Origin of the Species. Continuing the reading, the quote I used in my presentation to my Buddhist group is from Darwin's Descent of Man. Quoting Darwin, as humans advance in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, basic reason would tell each individual that one ought to extend one's social instincts and sympathies to all the members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being reached, Darwin continues, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent one's sympathies from extending to the people of all nations and races. It's an artificial barrier that prevents us extending our sympathies to people of all nations and races. Sympathy beyond the confines of humans, that is, sympathy of humanity to the lower animals, seems to be one of the later moral acquisitions we humans have adopted. This virtue, one of the noblest with which humans are endowed, seems to arise incidentally from our sympathies becoming more tender and more widely diffused until they are extended to all sentient beings. So Darwin saw the evolution of human consciousness as a consciousness that was becoming more broadly applied to all beings on the planet with greater sympathy and understanding toward all beings. As soon as this virtue is honored, says Darwin, and practiced by a few people, it spreads through instruction and example to the young, and eventually through public opinion. Then the author goes back. Darwin believed that sympathy serves an evolutionary purpose. And so, if you didn't know this about Darwin, take this away today, that the myth that Darwin's evolutionary theory was about competition and survival is actually a pretty dubious myth. It's actually more true that evolution required sympathy and compassion and cooperation. Darwin saw a gradual expansion of the circle of humanity, first to fellow country people, then to the entire human race, and eventually including all sentient beings. He called the sympathy towards the lower animals one of the noblest of human virtues. He saw the gradual expansion of the circle of sympathy as a rational and natural progression. Concluding, traditionally, Ahimsa is taught as a kind of ancient spiritual wisdom in Eastern religion, Hinduism and Buddhism particularly. The advancement of modern science, however, allows us to develop a new appreciation for the wisdom of Ahimsa. Kindness to others is not a luxury, it's a necessity for our own survival. So, there you have, both in Jain spiritual terms and then in Darwin's scientific mindset, an argument for Ahimsa. And I think that Ahimsa is something that is really well worth consideration and time, and a little effort to be put into practice by everyone. We're living on a planet where we are exploiting resources beyond their means to sustain us. We're doing all sorts of damage to one another as human beings through war and competition and economic disparity. I mean, you know the list of what ails us. And Ahimsa is an antidote to all of that. So this week and the next week when I talk about words or language, and the week after that when I talk about thinking, we're going to take Ahimsa and do a deeper psychological dive into it with the hopes that it can inform how we ourselves show up in the world. All right, I'm going to end here with some closing words by Hafez. Boy, have I been delving into the Sufis this summer. I hope I don't bore you with Sufi wisdom, but there's a lot of it to share. Hafez was a Sufi who wrote poetry, and he wrote this, which I encourage you to see through the lens of Ahimsa. And then when it's done, Clancy, if you could come up and extinguish a chalice, that would be great. And then potluck, right? Hafez wrote this: I have come into the world to see this. The sword dropped from people's hands even at the height of their arc of anger, because we have finally realized there is just one flesh we can wound, and it is His, Christ, our beloved. I have come into the world to see this. All creatures hold hands as we pass through this miraculous existence we share on the way to even a greater being of soul, a being of ecstatic light, forever entwined and at play with Him. I have come into the world to hear this. Every song the earth has sung since it was conceived in the divine's womb and began spinning from His wish. Every song by wing and fin and hoof, every song by hill and field and tree and woman and child, every song of stream and rock, every song of tool and lyre and flute, every song of gold and emerald and fire, every song the heart should cry with magnificent dignity as it knows itself as God. For all other knowledge will leave us again in wanting and in aching. Only imbibing the glorious Son will complete us. I have come into the world to experience this. People so true to love, they would rather die before speaking an unkind word. People so true, their lives are His covenant, our promise of hope. It's my favorite stanza in the poem. I'm going to read that one again. And ask yourself, am I one of these people? What would it take for me to be one of these people? I have come into the world to experience this. People so true to love, they would rather die before speaking an unkind word. People so true, their lives are His covenant, our promise of hope. I have come into the world to see this. The sword dropped from people's hands even at the height of their arc of anger, because we have finally realized there is just one flesh we can wound. Clancy, if you would.